Today, I'm going to tell you everything that I love and hate about my 2006 Audi A4 and why it's the car I just can't quit. What's happening, Panda Nation? Peter Von Panda. I'm out here with my 2006 Audi A4. It's the B7 model, 2.0 liter turbo Quattro, so it's all-wheel drive. And I've had this car for a number of years here, and it's a car I just cannot quit. So I want to go over this car in excruciating detail and tell you what I love and hate about it, why you might want to pick one up, and why I have thought about selling this car many times, but just never got myself to do it. Let's check it out. So here is the car in all its glory. It is a gray car, and actually there were a couple of gray Audi colors here. I actually can't remember which one this was. There was like a darker, more stone gray, and I actually wanted that one, but this is the one that I found. I actually didn't want it in silver because I wanted this to be a little darker, a little more sinister. Now, one of the reasons that I actually wanted this particular car, an Audi A4, even though I've had Audis before, and an A4 in particular, kind of one of the older generations, is that I really liked the roundedness of this car. As you can see, kind of that rounded front end and then also the rounded back end. It just had a really nice finished look. Kind of reminded me of the Saab 9-3. I don't remember if you remember those cars, but I actually really liked that Saab 9-3 just because it seemed pretty muscular. It looked like it was kind of machined or milled out of a solid block of metal, whereas a lot of cars look like the headlights are kind of bulbous, they're kind of stuck on, those types of things. But this car, especially here on the back end with these lights, I really liked them because they were just really flush and they really looked good. And even now this car I think looks pretty good, even though it's 15 years old, so pretty awesome. Now, one of the things that I also really liked about this is that it embraced its upright stance. So even though there is some curvature to the doors, it's got kind of more of an upright, narrow stance, and it just embraces that as opposed to trying to make a car look really wide, trying to make it look sporty, look low when it's not. So I do like it when designers take the packaging that they have to take, you know, say the platform or whatever, and design a car that actually embraces those proportions. And even though it's a small car, I thought it had a nice stance, and even though it doesn't look really wide, it looks kind of narrow and upright, it just looks good while doing it. So as you can see here, the flush headlights as well, kind of like those tail lights, everything is nicely sculpted in there, so it doesn't seem like things like where there are big rounded edges that meet other big rounded edges. The cars I can think like that were the Dodge Stratus, where the headlights, they look good. I mean, I think on paper the car was designed well, but the headlights look like a completely different piece, you know, as opposed to kind of a flush edge here. They were way rounded in, and I felt like people didn't want to take the time to make really exacting parts so that they could do flush parts, and they really wanted to round everything. So anyway, I like that. Now, the other thing I like about this is even though there's some bright work up here, the Audi logo and then the chrome trim around there is all chrome, the other parts here, well, are chrome too, have just a little bit of like a matte finish, and so they don't like pop out and scream like chromy bling bling. On the back here, it's also very reserved, other than the chrome around the logo right there, and on the badging, this strip down here, this protector around the bottom of the trunk, is actually kind of a brushed look, so I kind of like that. Now, a little bit of this is just weathering and age. I've got the windows rolled down here because it's a hot day. When I jump in there, I don't want to pass out, but I do like the fact that they didn't take a car and try to make it look like a luxury car. I mean, they kind of did, I guess, but what I hate is when you have like these really tiny cars that try to look like luxury cars, and a car like this, when you go younger, when you kind of go for the more youthful, the lower end, the cheaper segment of the crowd, I think they want sporty. Now, these are not the original wheels here. I really like these. These are Audi Rotor wheels, and so I put those on because you can actually still get those on current Audis, but I think they look pretty muscular. They're a little bit darker. They've got a nice diamond cut edge around, so it kind of frames out that wheel well, and I think it actually makes the car look a little bit more modern. The original wheels on here were a very fan-like multi-spoke wheel, and so I didn't think that they looked quite as good. I also like the fact that on the back here we have a dual exhaust, and so that's something you don't get on a lot of lower end cars, especially on turbos. You want the car to breathe. These exhaust tips aren't in the best shape, but they do kind of make the car look a little balanced. They give you some nice symmetry. They sound pretty good. I wouldn't say this car sounds super sporty, but it's just nice to have dual exhaust on cars. I kind of like that. The other thing I will say here is that even though this car is a bit aged, it's getting up there in the senior citizen range, it's been pretty easy on maintenance, other than, you know, some of the repairs. I've had some engine work done here on this 2-liter engine. You know, some of the things like I've had the coolant reservoir replaced and belts and tune-ups and things like that. It hasn't really been that bad, and actually one of the reasons that I haven't worried about kind of getting rid of this car prior to big repairs, big headache repairs, is that in many ways, the engine that's under here, I don't have the cover on there at the moment. In many ways, this engine is actually really easy to get your hands on. So here in Chicago, there are a number of breakers, and I have just noticed that this 2-liter turbo engine from Audi is available from breakers for $700 and $900 with pretty reasonable mileage on it. As you can see, there's plenty of space in here. So if you were to take it to a shop that would do an engine replacement, again, that's not a super easy thing, but it's maybe a day and a half worth of work. You know, $700 to $900 for the engine and another $1,000 to $2,000 to replace it. You know, you're talking about $2,000 to $3,000 to drop in a whole new motor. So if something goes bad, like a head gasket or something like that, that's going to take a lot of work to repair, I would probably be just as likely to say, hey, why don't you just drop out the engine, get a used engine with 70,000 miles on it and drop it in here, because this car has almost 100,000 miles on it, about 98,000 miles on it already. So now one of the things here, let's start with what I don't like, is if we drop down here, what we can see is that this car has a really long front overhang. The Saab 9.3 was not a lot different in that regard too. You know, it's not egregiously bad, but on the front here, it's more noticeable than any other part of the car, and it has a little bit of that 80s, 90s Firebird front overhang. You know, it's probably 2 feet in front of that front wheel. Now, if I were a car designer and I really wanted to get the proportions perfect on this, I feel like I would swing this front wheel forward just a little bit. I'd kind of bring the front edge of this tire a little closer to this light up there to kind of square that off a little bit better, probably give you a little bit better of an approach angle as well. But even still, even with 2 feet of overhang here on the front, it's really not that bad. And I think, you know, when I look at it, it's not one of those things where it screams to me, wow, that car has a lot of overhang there. On the back, I think this is just fine. To be really honest though, it probably wouldn't be a problem to have moved this wheel back. That wouldn't be for an aesthetics reason. It would just be to make a little bit more room here in the back seat. I'll talk about that. You know, obviously as a compact car, it's not gonna have a ton of space, but that actually might help you get a little bit more space in the passenger compartment there. All right, the last thing that I don't like about this is that the car sits a little bit too high on the stock suspension. I mean, you can see those wheel wells hugging the tires decently, but you know, this is probably, for my taste, just about an inch too high. I wouldn't mind it just being just a little bit lower. Yes, have I thought about dropping it a little bit? Yes, but you do want clearance here in the Midwest over rough roads and in the snow, so it's more of a practicality thing. But from an aesthetics point of view, from a style point of view, yes, I wouldn't mind if it were just dropped maybe another inch on the stock suspension. All right, let's take a look at the interior here and what I love and hate. And I will tell you that I really like most of what's going on here. Everything about this has decent material quality, and for 15-year-old materials, you can see kind of this elephant skin up here. Man, it's got this nice texture, so it doesn't have that really cheap texture. This is actually not the first generation of Audi A4 to have this material up there. Sometimes in some of these, they will delaminate a little bit. They'll start to come apart here from the sun in the corners, but this one is in really nice shape. There's maybe just a little bit of separation like here on the top of the air vents, but otherwise it looks really nice. And to my eye, I like that matte finish where it looks tough and it feels pretty soft, right? So you do get really good premium materials in a car that is the entry-level car for Audi. I also love that they have a really simple design here. So it's just a very flat instrument cluster with this drop-down center waterfall console here, and hopefully the sun glare isn't washing all this out. And then we have an aluminum strip here. This was wood in some of the models. It kind of goes around here to the door, ties in nicely, but it's just tasteful. It's not overdone. It's not over stylized. Everything here, like even the speakers to the air vents there, are nicely integrated, flush, without really rounded edges. They did a nice job of coming up with really sharp edges to the materials to make them flush. You know, even the door handles here have that kind of soft elephant hide type of material. The door panels there, I mean, most of the surfaces that you see and touch are pretty nice. Even that texture is replicated here on the center console. Even though this is a harder plastic, it looks pretty good. So until you touch it, it doesn't really feel like hard plastic, and it doesn't feel as hard and cheap as like some of the low rent Chevys, right? I mean, it just has a better matte texture. It seems to have held up better. So it's just really simple and yet looks pretty good. Even though this car is 15 years old, I can get in this and I can say, hey man, the design of this interior here still looks better than a lot of like the low-end cars, especially when you think about, you can get a brand new Chevy Spark or something like that and it still does not look as good as this. Now, those are different types of cars, but you would think even on the low-end Nissan, kind of the entry-level Sentra or something like that, that you would get materials like this at this point, but you don't. So I do love the fact that you have all these different types of finishes in the handle here even, right? This is like a painted finish on it, but it still looks and feels pretty decent there. Probably the only thing that I really notice here that's not looking real great is the plastic around here. It's a little bit of a cheaper plastic, has a little bit of that soft touch velvety finish on it that tends to come off with age. So you can see like the fingernail marks and the gouges and the scrapes there. Again, it's probably not the worst thing I've seen, especially in a car of this age, but this is probably showing the worst wear. I don't know what kind of material you can put here that's going to be super hard where your fingernails, your hand, you know, constant daily use is not going to wear on it, but it just doesn't look that bad. And in fact, if you look at most modern Audis, even like the handle like this and the lock switch right in front of the handle, I mean, all that has stayed the same. So it's just a testament to how well a simple, useful, utilitarian design actually works. Now, I also want to say here that the seats are really quite comfortable, and while they are all leather and there's nothing super plush about them, they don't have really high bolsters, you know, they're just pretty simple and they are comfortable to sit in even over long periods of time. The headrests are just about right. I hate when they angle headrests really far forward and you feel like you are leaning your head down just to accommodate them. So everything about this is really nice. Even in the back seat there, I have noticed that even with the headrest in the down position there, you tend to kind of feel that in your shoulder blades and you kind of lean forward, and most people want to adjust those headrests so that they're up higher so that they're not kind of leaning you forward. But in this car, even when people are in the back seat, I've never had anyone notice that. And again, I feel most comfortable in these seats, to be honest, even more comfortable than some of the seats in cars that are a decade newer, and even some of my new cars here. I also will say that even though, I'm going to close the door here, even though this is a very compact car, you can see my sexy legs there, you know, we've got a decently wide console here, and we don't have a lot of space between the seats, but what we have is a center console, and there's enough space for me to be super comfortable, put my arm on here, and I can take up the whole thing for sure. But if you do have a passenger in here, you can split this, and you don't feel like you are splitting a really, really narrow single arm armrest. It's not like an airplane armrest. This is quite a bit bigger. This is still sitting nice and soft and supple. And so even though this is a small car, it actually feels pretty light and open. I think part of that is the headliner here, which tends to be in this really light gray, and so it kind of makes the top feel a little airy. I do have a sunroof here. I don't know that I've ever used it other than to test it once, so I keep that closed most of the time, but you do have a pretty good amount of headroom here, and I don't think people get in this and feel like, oh man, this is a really small car. Again, the roof doesn't go up high like it does in an SUV, but it is a comfortable car to be in, especially for one person. It feels pretty luxurious, pretty open, but when you have two people in here, it doesn't start feeling claustrophobic, which is nice. Down here, we have one of the things that I don't like, or I guess I do like the fact that they're here, are these heated seats. And in the Audis, they have had these little heated seat rollers for the longest time, and while they work fine, the problem is that they are basically analog switches. So if I leave this on 2 and I get back in the car and I don't want the heated seat on, it's going to be on. So I do like the fact that most manufacturers have gone to digital switches, software switches. So if you turn them on and then you come back to your car after the car's off, they're always going to reset back to 0. But when you have a physical switch like this, one, it's not the easiest thing to get to, and it probably has too many graduations, 1 to 6 here. And I've noticed even on 4, the thing gets pretty toasty, kind of fried buns for dinner. But one of the things there is that I just like the fact that if I can get into my car one night and it's really cold and turn this all the way up, and then it's a little warmer the next day and I don't want the heated seat on, I have to either remember to turn it off before I get out, or I will be reminded when I get in and my buns are burning. So I wish those were software buttons. You can also see down here, one of the things I don't like is, you know, the finish on this looks good. It's kind of this matte finish, but it does tend to wear off, especially in buttons that you use a lot. Now, I've tried to be pretty careful with this, but I do use this down button on the air conditioner, the automatic climate control, a lot, and you can see there that the plastic is wearing off. Now, you can buy some stickers to put over that to kind of refinish them. They always look slightly janky, but I mean, this looks really janky, so it's probably going to be an improvement. I've just never done that. And obviously the buttons that you don't use very much, like the passenger side control, climate controls, are in pretty good shape because I never punch them. So all right, one of the things that I don't like is that up here, we don't have a universal garage door opener. We don't have like that home link system. So I get that in this car of this vintage, maybe that's not a standard feature, but it's like, I will say this many times, I would rather have home link installed than a sunroof. I just don't use a sunroof ever. If I want a convertible, I'll probably go out and get a convertible, but I would rather, you know, and I don't know what it costs, but like 30 bucks or something, right? Just wire in a garage door button. You don't even need multiple of them. I just would take one, and that would be really nice. Okay, now, I am going to just bust out the key here. You can see what kind of key we have. It's kind of just a standard switchblade key. And I'm going to turn this on here. And I'm going to show you a couple things that I like and hate. Now, first thing is the head unit on this While it wasn't a bad head unit when it was new, it just wasn't a great head unit. It's kind of similar to the blob hunks that you would get in the BMWs at the time. So I replaced it with this Android head unit, which actually looks pretty stock. The plastic here isn't quite the same finish, but what I really loved about this was that I could get Bluetooth streaming and Bluetooth hands-free in it. Now the Bluetooth hands-free isn't great because of the fact that this is a $300 head unit, but at least I have it. In the original configuration in this car, I didn't even have Bluetooth hands-free. So if you want to make calls, can be compliant with your local laws, but even just the convenience of being able to make phone calls and listen to your music on your phone, this is something that's almost necessary. I went ahead and got this and put this in. It wasn't that hard to do, but a car like this, obviously 15 years ago, basically predates the iPhone. The other cool thing that I actually use a lot is this little retractable door here. I use it for change. I think other people might use it for credit cards, parking cards, those types of things, but it's kind of nice to have a little easy to access, soft touch little change drawer like that. So it's one of those silly things that I really like. Okay, the other thing that I actually really like here is the steering wheel. So it's got these nice little perforations on it. I don't know that there's anything breathable about it per se, but it feels good in the hand. The leather's held up pretty well here. I have cleaned and conditioned this on occasion. I even like the center cover here. It's got this, like, again, kind of matte brushed bead blasted silver look, so it's not quite that bright work that I mentioned, you know, that you would see on other cars. It's kind of this matte finish, which I actually really like. It holds up a little better, I think. Steering wheel controls here are nice. The volume right there, and then, you know, the selector for changing the preset. It's really convenient to have these at your fingertips, and everything about this steering wheel is really nice. I actually like the look of it. I just like staring at it every day, kind of like this little face right there. Now the other thing that I actually really like are these instrument clusters. I do like the fact that these instrument rings look pretty deep, so they don't look like they're just tacked on. They almost look like barrels around the instruments. They are also that matte finish, so it's not trying to be a luxury car. It feels a little bit more sporty than luxury. They even have it around this LCD. Now my LCD here is actually in pretty good shape. I don't have any burned out pixels or anything. It's kind of common on the Audis, especially the older ones that might get a lot of heat or cold. But even though this car is parked outside all the time for the last few years, it's been parked outside in the summer and in the winter, it's not one of those things where it's gone out on me, which is actually really nice. So I actually really like this instrument cluster. I think it still looks nice after all of this time. One of the things that I don't like here is that this armrest, while I do like it and has some storage in there, you actually have to lift it up to use both of these cup holders. So we have two cup holders here. This front one is actually pretty easy to use. As you can see, it rides just in front of this armrest, but to use the second one, you basically have to move this up. Now the armrest will stay up at kind of weird positions, so if I go all the way back and reset it like that, what I can do is I can lift it up to about here, and it'll hover up at this weird angle, which sometimes will allow me to get a second cup in here. If you have a passenger in here, you're almost certainly going to use that, but otherwise you want to move that up out of the way. It's always a packaging problem to get cup holders in convenient spots, but at least in this case, it's really driver focused car, one person, one drink, no problem. You can make accommodations for two people. I will also say I really like the fact that we have a power outlet back here too, so not only can my passenger charge stuff, but I can charge stuff too, because we have up here under this little flip up lid another power outlet and an ashtray if you need that, which who doesn't? When you're smoking your Macanudos in the car. All right, so let's take a look at the back here, because there are some things that I love and hate about this. One, I actually love the fact that they did a pretty good job of balancing everything back here. So nice seats. You do have this center armrest that folds down. This is actually done nice. This is actually flat, but it's still quite padded, so it's pretty comfortable. And then right here, what we have is some storage and then this first aid kit. But we also have right up here two cup holders that pop out. I don't know that I've ever used these. I don't think I've ever had a guest that's ever needed them, but it's kind of nice. Most times they will just mold cup holders in the middle. Those works. It doesn't require any technology. It's not something that's going to break like this possibly in the future. But when you don't have drinks, and most passengers, I think, unless you're on a road trip, I don't know that this would be the car for it, but you're always going to look at those janky cup holders in there. But otherwise, that armrest is pretty nice and pretty wide. Now, the thing about this that I love and hate is that they did a pretty good job of balancing it. You can see this is where I put my seat, sitting at 5'8", and I actually have plenty of room to get in here. Now, would I say this is the most comfortable back seat ever? Not really. We do have some cutouts, as you can see there, for my knees, so that if your knees are really up against there, you're getting another recessed inch there to make it a little more comfortable. Mesh pockets back there, but as you can see here, my feet really have to go under the seat in front of me to be comfortable, but I don't feel like I'm sitting in an awkward position. And if I close the door, you know, this feels pretty good. The armrest is right where I need it on both sides, and so I can fit in here pretty pretty well, and I have a decent amount of headroom. So one of the things here, it's a little bit of an illusion, is that the headliner here has a recess right up here and then drops back down here. So we actually have reading lights up here, which is kind of nice, but your head will be up here. Now if I lean forward a little bit while I'm not hitting this, you actually feel best by sitting all the way back, right? And so I like the fact that they built that in to accommodate some taller people. Would you want to be sitting in this car on a long ride? I don't know. I mean, I could probably do several hours in it, to be really honest. I've got the seat pushed back for the comfort of my passengers so that it accommodates whoever might be sitting in it, no matter how tall they are. But obviously, if you were about 5'10" and I really wanted to maximize space for everyone in this car, I would still move this up a little bit. I think the 5'10" passenger would still be comfortable. We could get another person in the back here, but I really also like that they don't chintz out on the materials here in the back either. This is actually something that happens in a lot of GM cars where the front materials are better than the back, but as you can see, the materials, the soft touch materials on the door panel, the door handles, even the door pulls right there, which are kind of nice, are all just about the same thing. So that's pretty nice. And the other thing I like about this is that on the back seat here, the materials also, again, look pretty nice. I don't know what this is wrapped in, but you can see that we still have this hide pattern even on the back. A lot of times what they'll do is they'll just have exposed, cheap, low rent, hard plastic on the back of the seats because they don't care what your passengers are looking at. But that's one of the reasons that you get into a car like this, and nothing screams at you that it's really cheap, low rent, hard materials, even when you're in the back seat like that. And so that's why people, I think, are like, oh, you have an Audi. You know, no one's saying that about this car these days. But if you were to get a new Audi, just kind of these small touches, I think, is what really separate it from some of the other cars that will obviously have plastic here, maybe a vinyl pocket right there, maybe no pocket at all. So I just think those types of things, even on the back of the headrest in many cars, the back here tends to be just a vinyl or something cheap. So they do a nice job all the way through the car on this. And let's come around to the back here. I want to pop the trunk here and just show you, man, this is a big trunk. And one of the things that I really like about this is that it's easy to put everything that you need, whether you're going on a road trip. I'm putting in a golf bag, a couple of golf bags. I have this little cheap vinyl liner that I bought from eBay or something, just to kind of protect the floor, maybe brighten it up a little bit. I don't know if something is supposed to go into this little side compartment here, but that gives you space to put in some emergency supplies, your tire pump, those types of things. And if we go to this side, we actually have this little mesh pocket, which I actually do use a lot. I put bug spray, suntan lotion, shoes, things like that I want to have quick access to. And there's also another 12 volt back here, so if you wanted to plug something in, doing a little tailgating, you could certainly do that there too. But you get a nice big trunk on this thing, which is actually really surprising for a car this small. So overall, you know, build quality, style, I really like this car. So now I want to take it on a drive and share with you what I love and hate about how it rides. All right, so we're driving this car, and I can tell you that driving this car is probably one of my favorite things because it's just a small car, so it's easy to jump in, run errands. It's one of those things where I've had cars where I've said, you know, I've got to run to the store, just pick up something, and I've been like, I don't want to get in that car. It's not comfortable to get into. It's too big to park. It's too hard to drive around. It doesn't slip through the streets. I can't parallel park it, whatever. But this is a car that just does all of those things really well. You can just jump into it, feel like you're wearing it, go out, run errands, come back. Easy to park, easy to maneuver, easy to get in and out of traffic, get up to speed, you know, brake. It's really comfortable to do all of those things. So that's why I enjoy this car, and that's why it's so hard to quit this car. Now, let me tell you a couple things that you do have to know about driving this car. Now, it's a smaller engine, 2-liter turbo, but I would say that in most cases, I'm not really accelerating where I'm feeling that turbo lag. I'm not really on the gas. You're kind of just driving at normal city, suburban paces, and so you don't need like that thrust. But one of the things, as I'm coming up to a stop sign here, is that it tends to try to bias itself for comfort and for fuel consumption, I think. So as I come to a stop here, what I will see if it will do here is I'm going to turn right. I'm going to come all the way to the stop, and I can see the gear numbers go down to 2. So now it just actually went to 1. So if I get on the gas here, I'm actually in first gear. It went up to 2. Now we're on 3 already. I'm only doing like 20 miles an hour here, but you can see how quickly it shifts. Now I bring that up because sometimes I'm at a dead stop and it's in second gear because it's going to pull away, you know, in normal traffic in second gear. It's going to save on gas. It's going to be a more comfortable acceleration. It's not going to jolt you out of there, but sometimes you're in like a left turn lane, you're going to turn against traffic, and one of the things that you want to do is just pounce on that gas and get all that power and turn through there. And sometimes when it's in second, what it'll do is it'll kind of move. This is what it feels like. I'm being overly dramatic. It kind of moves, realizes you are deep on the gas, and says, all right, shift down to 1, and then it'll shift down, and then it'll go now, move you faster. And so the problem there is that there are these awkward and sometimes disconcerting moments where you are really on the gas, and you maybe it's only a second or two, but it feels like the car is almost stalled out. It's not doing anything, and you're like, I've asked for more power than ever. Normally when you're on the gas, 20% throttle, 30% throttle, the car is moving, and suddenly you're 100% and the car isn't moving any faster. So that's what's disconcerting. I can't really tell you what the formula uses or the algorithm that it uses to decide which gear to be in at a dead stop. So right now I can tell you that looking down at the dash, it says 1, so we're going to take off in first gear. I don't know what that's about, but sometimes I've just noticed I'll be at a dead stop and it's still sitting in second gear. So sometimes it's trying to interpret maybe how you've driven. I don't know, the angle of the car. I'm not sure what, but there are just times when I have wanted to be in first gear and it's not. Now, you can remedy that by hitting this gear shifter out to this side and putting it in manual, and then you can shift up and down, a little Tiptronic action, and get yourself into first. But I think for most of us, we're always driving in automatic mode, and when I want power, I'm just used to punching the throttle, not necessarily thinking, okay, I'm going to want power, I'm going to put it into manual shifting, all right? So that's one of the things that I kind of dislike about it, is just that the gear selection sometimes on this. Now, I will say that in terms of the way it drives, even though this isn't a super powerful engine, it's pretty peppy and it's more than adequate. I've heard about people driving small displacement turbo engines and complaining about how, you know, laggy they are or underpowered or leisurely they are. I've never really felt like that in general, other than those gear issues. So this car really gets up and goes. I think part of that is how light it is. I think just everything about this car is actually made pretty light, and so it feels like it's pretty nimble. Now, the drawback to that is road noise and wind noise and things like this. Now, even if you compare this to a 2006 equivalent, say the Chevy equivalent, the Ford equivalent at that time, I think it's probably going to be better. But if you were to get into a new Chevy Cruze, so Chevy Cruze, I had rented one of those recently on a business trip, and you get into that, I've kind of noticed that the new cars, like the 2020s, the 2021 models, even on the base models, are as quiet or quieter than this, have a little bit kind of softer ride, more insulation from the noise. I don't know if it's better glass, better dampening materials, sound insulating materials, better road mats, wheels, different tires, those types of things. But this car is pretty good. But I've noticed it mostly when I'm driving, cruising at highway speeds. I'm Bluetoothing my podcasts on here, and I really do have to kind of crank them up to hear what the dialogue is on a podcast or an audio book, because I've got a lot of competing sounds, a lot of wind noise. I've got obviously the AC on right now, which is creating a little bit of noise, but you know, that's pretty normal. You're always going to get that inside of a car, but it's just, you know, the rough road or whatever it is, you know, like we're just driving over some rough pavement there, and I can hear and feel a little bit of that rumble coming through the car. Now, I think because you are on this side of sporty as opposed to this side of luxury, that's just going to be the nature of it. And I do like the sharpness of the handling. I mean, this is a really sharp car. I tell you what, there's another car, which I will reveal at the end of my video here, that I'm driving, and I think it's supposed to be pretty similar to this, but it's not as precise, it's not as sharp as this. And I'll tell you what, from just a driving dynamics, handling standpoint, I like driving this car better. I feel like the way it handles the bumps and kind of the way it shallows out is more predictable. It feels more, you know, natural, and everything about how this car moves, and it might be just because I've driven it for a long time, it feels right. You get into some other cars, even when they're tuned for performance or whatever, and they, you know, they just feel a little hairy. And I think sometimes that's the electronic nannies, you know, jumping in and trying to help out a little bit and correcting, and you know, it's just not supernatural. Not supernatural like demonic, just super natural for you to feel a car that's pretty analog, that's just, you know, coils and struts, and it's just the way cars, you know, used to be built. And you know, the good, the bad, the imperfections, the trade-offs, the pros, cons, tendencies of them are just all felt in your hands. And like I said, if I just wiggle the wheel here, man, the car kind of darts back and forth in the lane. And I actually really like that, because that means you have a lot of control over the car. All right, the other thing I want to say here is that the car is pretty fuel efficient. You know, turbo engines are all the rage now, but back in 2006, when this car was out, it was usually a little bit larger displacement, naturally aspirated. You know, it was easy to find the 3-liter block in a lot of Chevys, you know, the V6 motor competing against this, and a lot of people poo-pooed the smaller displacement. But now we've kind of learned that unless you need that boost, unless you need that extra power, you know, you kind of reserve that with the turbo and you're not burning gas all the time. And so this car has been pretty fuel efficient. I've gotten about 21 miles a gallon on it, you know, in the way I drive, but that's kind of an irrelevant number for a lot of us, because whether you live in the city or you're just highway driving with it, those types of things, you know, it's all going to be different for people. Now, I will say that the Quattro here is amazing, and I don't have anything to demo it today, but I will tell you the story is I actually went downtown for a basketball game one day, and we had known that there was going to be this huge ice storm coming through. And so when I got out of the basketball game, there was just slush, sleet, and ice everywhere. I mean, the roads were bad, and I decided, you know, I was going to drive home. A lot of people were saying, let's belly up at the bar and wait a couple hours, see if they plow the roads. But as I was driving home, there were cars disabled all over the place. It was just like even the crown of the road. They were stuck on the sides of the road, and they couldn't get away from the curb. You know, they couldn't get up the crown of the road onto the main road, and there were cars sliding around, and the traffic was moving very, very slowly. But for me, woo, a little flock of birds. Alfred Hitchcock would like that. But for me, man, this car was just a champ. Yes, it was doing a little fishtailing sometimes where it would get really sloppy, but man, I was moving in this car, and that's really the first time I noticed the benefit and the beauty of all-wheel drive Quattro in particular. Now, I know the Quattro system is slightly different from like the X-Track system from BMW and some of those, and I think that they all probably work decently well, but man, for a 15-year-old all-wheel drive system, this thing is a champ in the snow. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to babysit it. You can just put your foot into the throttle and just kind of be judicious about that and then get where you need to go. But this thing was, you know, leaving some rooster tails, but it was getting through everything. And then also when it snows here, I have noticed that some cars, you know, some trucks even, which are really struggling in some of the snow, we don't have a lot of snow usually, and maybe only 4 or 5 inches before the snow plows hit them in the morning, but this car will kind of cruise right through them. So Quattro is great. Part of that is because there's actually a pretty good amount of clearance underneath this car. You know, it's probably one of those things I complained about. If I were to lower this car an inch, I'd lose a little bit of that, have the undercarriage, you know, dragging on the snow, creating some more resistance and friction. But as it sits right now, this car is a really good balance of everything. Just driving dynamics, driving enjoyment, the ease of parking and getting in and out of traffic, decent power. It's absolutely phenomenal in the snow. In bad weather conditions like that, snow, sleet, slush, and ice, this thing was a champ. Got me all the way home. At no point did I ever feel like I was going to get bogged down somewhere or be stranded somewhere, even though I could see cars pulled over, waiting for help, hazard flashers on, all those types of things. So I will tell you, this car has been a champ. Now, there have been probably a dozen times in the number of years that I've owned this where I've said, all right, you know, I'm going to move on to another car, and this is the car I just can't quit, because every time I think about it, I'm like, well, you know, the Audi A4s, while they're not super expensive to maintain, and these older ones are not super expensive. You know, you're talking about a B7 here, so you can get these from what, 2004, 5, 6. You know, you're talking about a 15-year-old car. I think they still look smart. You're not going to get a lot of money out of them. And so to me, I was always like, man, the usefulness of the car outvalues its value in my checkbook. So if I just keep driving this and just wait for the car to die, I'm almost better doing that. And if I get a year out of it, you know, I won't get the money out of it, but it's just been a great car, and it's been one of those cars that I just haven't wanted to sell. In fact, when I got laid off about a year and a half ago, one of the reasons that I had this car was just, it was a good car to drive to work for all those reasons. But on top of that, it wasn't a car that was ostentatious or showy in any way. It was a nice car, but it also didn't say, hey, I'm a car snob, right? And so, you know, I could have pulled up in a Buick Verano or anything like that. And I think, again, it's kind of the same thing. People say, hey, that's a decent car, but aren't overly impressed by it, don't think twice about it. And that's what I really liked about this car, is it had a little bit of anonymity, and it had just enough creature comforts for me to make me feel decent about myself driving to work. And so that's what I really liked about this car. That's what I love about this car. That's why I want to keep this car, and that's why I haven't been able to let it go, because on so many fronts it's just what you need. It just kind of treats you right, makes you feel right, and yet you don't have to worry about getting carjacked because you're driving a car that's way out of your price point. And so that's one of the things that I really like about this. Now I will say that for this vintage of car with, you know, the 97,000 miles I have on here, my guess is that this is a $5,000 or $6,000 car. It might be a $4,000 car. I think some of the cars of this age have more miles, 100,000 plus. They're probably in the $3,000 or $4,000 range. But assuming that they've been taken care of, assuming that you don't have major issues, you know, engine fluid leaks, the Quattro isn't out, but assuming that it runs pretty nice, I think this is a steal. So for $4,000 or $5,000, I feel like this is a lot of car that's enjoyable to drive, that is pretty practical, will move people, is good in bad weather, it's good on mileage, it still looks sharp. You know, even that big grille, even though I have a bumper that goes through the middle of the grille there, you know, that big grille is still the same signature grille that Audi uses. So it doesn't really look as dated as other brands that have really kind of gone to a different front fascia, like the BMWs. The BMWs, even 5 or 6 years old now, don't look anything like the BMWs now with those really big, long, tall kidney grills. So I really love this car, man. It's hard for me to get rid of it, but I have thought, you know, with the newer creature comforts, with lower mileage, there's got to be something to replace this. And, you know, as I was looking at the Audis, because obviously I really like this, I've noticed that the Audi A4 has grown in size. So it's not really a comparable car to this anymore. It's kind of like what the old Audi A6s were, and the old Audi A6s are now like what the old Audi A8s were. So is there anything in Audi's lineup that is kind of like this A4, that's really small, that's nice and compact, that's really easy to drive, that will give me some of that enjoyment in driving again, and be easy to park, easy to get in and out of traffic with a similar engine? You know, I'm not sure, but if there is, I tell you what, I'm gonna get it, because I really like this car, but I do feel like it is time to move on from this one. But man, I would love a car that's almost exactly the same in every way. Wink, wink, wink. So whatever I replace that with, I will let you know in the future. But if you are looking at the B7 Audi A4s, man, these are great. I really love them. And if you have one, I'll put a link to some really cool accessories that I've put in this one to make it even more livable for me in the description below. Peter on Panda, out.
We can discover more and explore so much deeper. We can live better than ever.